Alright, so not as many packages as last time. You know, I know people ask me for big updates, but the truth of the matter is I just pre-order everything, and whatever happens to show up happens to show up. Oof, sorry, I can feel that I'm shaking the camera doing this. Sorry. Need to relocate back behind the camera so I can continue unpackaging. There we go. Paper. It's a lot of paper. And the contents, I'm not quite sure what they are yet. Oh, yeah, this is not anime, but I was kind of interested in picking this up. I forgot that I had ordered this. This is a non-anime thing. Basically, I do believe I already have that. That's The Secret of Kells, but I didn't have these two, and you know, I figured, why not? This seemed like a really neat thing. It's a, what is it called? Irish Folklore Trilogy? It's pretty cool. Actually, let's take a look at this before I go and dive into the actual Japanese animations. And that's what I'm using for anime. I know some people don't, but to me, I mean, the word anime meaning anything that's animated or anything that's awesome and animated is kind of not quite what I'm looking for. And even the idea of foreign, maybe you could include Asian, I don't know. The point is, I'm more focused on, you know, recognition that this disc is falling out. This packaging reminds me quite a bit of some of the Harry Potter stuff. Song of the Sea. Holy shit, these things do not want to stay in their thing. There's definitely some cute style. This is Wolfwalker. This is a bonus disc. It's pretty cool. And then here we have a booklet with some imagery and some text. And I bet this is a poster. Cartoon Saloon's Irish Folklore Trilogy. Nothing on the backside, and you know, basically that. Maybe this increases the chance that I will actually watch The Secret of Kells. It's been sitting around unwatched for a while. But you know, there's a lot of things that remain unwatched. I'd say on a list, but I don't even keep a list, so that's probably why a lot of them stay unwatched. But I mentioned that, but there's the interesting thing where this week I do have something that I watched to do the content of both of these. So much, ooh, definitely weird anime-wise. So first up we have ZX. Yeah, ZX, complete TV series. Which you have to say, you know, there's some really neat character designs going on here, at least, you know, from my perspective, in my opinion. But the fact that Discotek picked this up means that, what color will the future be? Suggests to me that maybe it wasn't as popular, but I don't know. There's at least some neat imagery there. Curious. And, you know, it's no surprise this is Japanese with English subtitles only. You know, usually... Oh, yeah, of course. And it looks different on the inside. So this guy is up there, but he's a little more prominent here. Okay, so then we have a thing where we have our 5 characters and kind of a mix of protagonists, antagonists going on there. ZX Ignition. The name sounds familiar, and I don't know if it's because I placed the order for this, or if maybe this was released. Well, if this was released by somebody else previously, then it would have a dub, probably. And this one doesn't. How many episodes is that? 12 episodes on one disc? Interesting. And then we got Robotech Part 3, which, again, Robotech is kind of weird because it's a mix of 3 other anime, and this looks like it's the... Did I watch Genesis Climb and Mospeada? I don't think I did, but I could be wrong. But yeah, so Robotech was a combination of the first Macross, Southern Cross, and Genesis Climber Mospeada? Something like that. All of those have had proper US releases. I think Japanese with the English subtitles for the latter two. I don't remember for Macross. Regions A and B. This should be English dub only because it really just put some, you know, all those series I mentioned, it just puts them all together in one big thing. It's highly edited, doing whatever it wants. And I think there's some room for criticism there. But at the same time, I think it's beloved in a lot of ways, so that's why, you know, here we go. I don't remember if I have had Robotech on Blu-ray before. I don't think I did, so now I definitely do. Well, I guess today ended up a smaller update than I thought. Here's this week's anime Blu-ray collection update. Alright, where to begin? Obviously with my Friday friend, watched a little more Rising of the Shield Hero. And you know, it's all good stuff. I feel like I've complained about some of this part before, but there's definitely an issue with a couple of characters. Not like super heavy, but more like victim blamey. Like, yeah, I think I'm okay with talking about this because I'm not talking about what specifically happens, but there are some characters that are telling the Shield hero that he needs to reconcile with the other 3 heroes, when the real problem is the other 3 heroes have been villainizing him with everybody else from the beginning. And really, they need to tell those pieces of shit to get their heads out of their asses and to start smelling what the air really smells like. Which, it smells like shit, not because they have their heads out their asses. Colorful language, I know. But, you know, I think we got a little bit past some of that stuff and more towards stuff that leads towards the end of the series. And we're right at a breaking point where a friend that joins for the Friday friend get-togethers every once in a while, now is the perfect time, because he's really liked what he's seen about it. And the truth of the matter is Rising of the Shield Hero does some great stuff. Not only does it have these neat moments, but like, the combat and action is very interesting. Like, he was there for the scene where Shield Hero and Raphtalia are there, and you know, he's a shield, but she's his sword, so, you know, their combat was one where she would attack and he would come in for a hit and she'd come in for an attack, you know, this really cool switching up sort of thing. And there's little things like that that make it really engaging to watch even from a combat perspective. So, you know, it's really unfortunate for all the other anime that Rising of the Shield Hero gets so much, you know, positive talking about, but, you know, that's the one that's up next, so there we go. We got that out of the way. And I think last week I was in the middle of something that's here. Why am I blanking? Nothing that's here. Did I finish whatever it was? What in the world was I watching last week before? No? Fuck, I don't remember. I had something in that I was playing with, and I don't recall if I was... Maybe I finished it. But I did mention during my update, or rather my unboxing last week, that Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in the Dungeon Season 3 was a high priority, and that was because the stinger at the end of Season 2 was interesting. And for the most part, I don't remember the details of Season 2, but I do remember the main issue I had with it was there was no time spent down in the dungeon. It kind of establishes that the dungeon is kind of the antagonist. I mean, there's antagonism coming from other familia and the interactions between them, but the dungeon is the main thing. There's something important about the dungeon, about going down into the dungeon that none of the characters know about, and so conceptually that's the real antagonist of the show, at least as of season 1. And season 2, it felt like a distraction from that. It did world building, and it's this world building of the interactions between the different familias and the building up of the Hestia familia. But from what I remember, I didn't care about that as much. I mean, for me, saying the word familia is just a thing. It's a group that they call themselves. But I get the impression that there's some people that are really into shows that call groups familias, I guess. Basically, an offhand comment from Reincarnated as a Slime, which, you know, made me think, I guess that's a thing that I think is another anime, but again, I don't pay attention. So, the stinger at the end of season 2 kind of suggested something related to the dungeon that would basically change our understanding of things, or the character's understanding of things, or something. It's a shake-up sort of thing. And, in my opinion, season 3 turned out to be a whole lot of that, and it did so in a really great way. In particular, how do I want to say this? In fact, what was I about to say? I'm kind of blanking a bit here. Well, I would think, oh yeah, I was going to say that I was actually quite surprised when I took a look at the ratings, that the rating for season 3 didn't seem to be significantly higher, because in my opinion, this was some of the best stuff to come out of this show. Now, you know, maybe different people go in for different reasons, but for me, this one tackled not just... It didn't just introduce this concept of what's really going on. It did answer questions, but it raised questions that I thought redirected the focus better towards where things need to go. And it started raising questions. You know, our main characters kind of know what is the right thing, but it's interesting because a lot of in this third season is challenging, can they actually do the right thing? It's challenging them kind of on their beliefs, and it really drives home the point that in this show they've been calling the characters that go into the dungeon adventurers and not heroes, and you kind of realize that there's a difference between those two. And, you know, the show plays with that really hard. And there's some conveniences in there for sure, but overall, it was the kind of stuff I really wanted to see, the stuff I really enjoyed. You know, if our main character is building up to be a really great person, and it isn't just, oh yeah, well his numbers go high, is he willing to do the right thing even if the consequences for doing that are hard for him? And it feels like something important got really touched on here. It makes me look forward to season 4, but there's no stinger at the end of this season that makes me... Was there no stinger at the end of this one? I should probably revisit the stinger at the end of season 2 to see if it was pre-credit, post-credit, and then check credits here to make sure I didn't miss something post-credits. Which isn't hard because, you know, I highly prioritized rewatching scenes from this. I wouldn't call all of it perfect again, but it was all along the right lines. I really liked the season. And to kind of give an idea of just how much I liked and appreciated this, Goddess Hestia actually comes off really well in this one as well. And it's not like she's been a bad person, but she's been kind of a teetering on the edge of being of seeming like a possessive, jealous goddess kind of person. You know, maybe she's, you know, holding herself back because, you know, she's just playing with the kids or something. She doesn't always kind of feel that way, you know? But I'm pretty sure she had her moments to shine just as a general setting the vibe sort of thing. And I thought that shone the brightest here in season 3. Where, like, I kind of felt like she as a parental figure, which is what the gods and goddesses are supposed to kind of be like in this case. You know, that's why their familiars are often called their children. I kind of felt like she was in that role in kind of a most satisfying way in this season. So, you know, obviously, I really liked this season. I'd go into more details about what I thought didn't quite work, but was fine enough to pass, but a lot of that's very spoiler, so, you know, I'm just going to leave it at that, saying I really like where they went with Season 3. And then Rent-A-Girlfriend, you know, I was just morbidly curious, I guess was the right word, because like I said, I had some worries about it, because I didn't know what to make of it, and the entire idea of renting a girlfriend is like completely the opposite of what I would ever want to try to do. To the point where it's like, I kind of feel like, I wish I could remember, that anime, Season 2, My Teen Romantic Comedy Snafu. So Season 2, you know, they talked about wanting something genuine. And I completely agree, and part of the reason that I don't have any energy to try to invest in relationships in real life myself, and I don't mean like friends or family relationships, I mean romantic relationships, because friends, you can come up with the expectation of where you lie with friends, and family, you can set boundaries. If family doesn't respect boundaries, you can get them out of your life, but I've been fortunate to have a family that understands its boundaries well enough. In other words, you know, my parents know that they're when they come to visit me, they're coming to visit me and not coming, oh, and by the way, you should have expected us to visit you. You know, nothing toxic like that, you know. We're two pairs of adults living our own sets of lives. Pairs, that's not the right word considering I'm single, right? But with relationships, it gets a little harder, especially since I get this feeling like Snafu Season 2 kind of insinuates that a lot of people tend to not have very genuine relationships. And maybe most of y'all do, maybe most of y'all feel like you do. The point is rather, could I be comfortable enough with somebody to kind of feel like that, right? And so that's my reason why I wouldn't even consider using Rent-A-Girlfriend, and I think this exists for the people who kind of choose not to pay attention to that. In other words, the entire point is that the people from the Rent-A-Girlfriend service are pretending to be a girlfriend, and it really is pretend. But this one is about how our main guy and the girl are kind of interacting, and there's some things our main character observes that are right, but there's also a desperation in him which made him jump into the Rent-A-Girlfriend service in the first place. Now, my thoughts were that this was a show where, okay, since it's talking about if you can't buy happiness, can you rent it instead, kind of gave me the impression that maybe he would rent a girlfriend and maybe they would be like playing with different girlfriends or something sort of like that. And it's better than that. Fortunately, it's really about it, or at least I've only watched like 1.5, maybe most of episode 2, I don't know. Okay. I was thinking that I had to stop watching this to watch Dungeons 3, but actually, I stopped this because Friday came and my Friday friend came over and it was time to watch more Rising of the Shield Hero. But no. He rents one girl, and it really does seem to be about his relationship with her. And there's probably more to it, but I don't think there's other rent-a-girlfriends that are necessarily a part of it, other than from the context of his relationship with her, if that does happen in the future. I was warned that he's a bit something. I don't remember what the warning was, but yeah. Even though he has good observations, like the guy installed the Rent-A-Girlfriend app, agreed to the terms, went on a Rent-A-Girlfriend date, but he's right. It was completely fake. And her behavior was completely fake, and her feelings for him were, of course, completely fake. And that's really the problem with it. Right? And it's nice that he as a character at least acknowledges that. But he he won't. The show seems to be leaning very heavily on people ever so slightly misunderstanding stuff. I was afraid it was leaning very heavily on it, but episode 2 started looking like it wasn't as heavy as I was afraid of. Basically, our main guy is definitely afraid to tell his grandma the truth. And you know, when you're young, that can be kind of hard, but at the same time, it's like, I really hate these fake things being built on pretend things. So he does embody a lot of that, but her attitude is definitely one that's very nonplussed about it either. Like, there's an element to this where, of course, when she's a rented girlfriend, she's really nice, but when she's no longer pretending, I don't think this is quite the right word, but for lack of better terms, she turns into a bitch. She doesn't really. She's just a lot more condescending, flippant, something. Not necessarily bad, but not really nice, I guess. And where episode 2 was going, I didn't care. I went a little bit further, but again, you know, eventually I got interrupted because, you know, when days cross over and I have a lot of work, and then I get off of work, and then it's my Friday friend, you know, the disc gets ejected and Rising of the Shield Hero gets put in. And I didn't feel a big need to return to this because the basic premise is one that irks me. It's like, it seems like it might be a show about a couple, you know, this boy and this girl who do develop a relationship, and the rented girlfriend setup is a way for starting that, but it's a little more turbulent and forced than I would prefer, for lack of better terms. And I could be describing this ever so slightly wrong, but you know, it's basically my thoughts. And the truth of the matter is, you know, I came sitting down today thinking more that I talk about Dungeons 3, and I finally watched Ringu for the first time. So, the story on the reasoning for that is pretty simple. Dead by Daylight has announced that in March, they're doing their next licensed chapter, which is going to be a Ringu Dead by Daylight combination. For those that don't know what I mean when I keep saying Ringu, if you think The Ring, you're along the right tracks. Basically, you had the... I think the novel was called Ringu. You had the movie called Ringu, and then you had the American remake of the Ringu movie called The Ring. And I had watched The Ring a long time ago, back in college, but I'd never seen Ringu. It was always on my bucket list of things to potentially watch. Hence my conversation earlier in the video about bucket things for me to watch. And I've understood from comments on the Dead by Daylight subreddit that the books are pretty fucking bonkers, but there's a lot of point that the refinement that went into creating the movie Ringu is hinted at as being, you know, kind of some of the focus. Because in the books you have pretty crazy stuff of... It sounds like it's less horror and maybe some existential dread combined with science fiction, with different levels of that depending on how far in the books you go or something like that. So, not quite the same thing. Ringu and The Ring are both definitely horror movies. But yeah, for me, understanding that the direction the books went are probably not going to be very heavily influencing what happens in Dead by Daylight, for the simple fact of the matter of the iconic character, Sadako in the Japanese version and Samara in the English version. You know, obviously very different characters with very different backgrounds, but the same general idea of the girl who is understood to have previously died, who is causing curses. She's wearing a white dress and she has black hair going down very far, completely covering her face, and she comes out of the TV to kill you. You know, that iconic imagery is present in both those, and it is suggested in the wording that that is part of what is being planned. And so if there's other weird things they might do, I don't know, maybe there's a part of me that worries that, you know, the people working on Dead by Daylight are going a little too woke. But fortunately, a lot of that exists in the lore, and when it comes to gameplay itself, that doesn't. So there's a possibility that, since in later books Sadako becomes a hermaphrodite, I think that's the right word. She has both sexual organs. There's one part of me wondering if there could be an intention to go trans-ambiguous as a gender for the killer. I don't see a pressing need to do that, just because Sadako is Sadako. And if they wanted to do some gender swap versions of them, I wonder if that would work as much, just because the long black hair is a traditionally female attire and is an iconic part of the character's looks. But yeah, okay, all of that aside, I decided it was time for me to just sit down and watch Ringu. I watched it off of YouTube. I hope that was legitimate. If it wasn't, then, well, probably should have a legitimate copy, but I don't know if I have one somewhere. And mostly I was kind of watching it because I assumed that that Japanese movie is probably closer to the core of what they're going to be inspired by. You know, maybe they'll tap into the books a little. And I do wonder if maybe there's actually a little bit they can pull from the American version. Because you watch that movie and then you kind of have to do a compare-contrast. And which movie did I like more? I think I like the American version more, but I'm not sure that that's an objective observation so much as, you know, just a very subjective one. They both have a campiness to them, but they're very different kinds, and while I kind of rolled my eyes in my head at both of them, the American one kind of has the stuff I'm used to, and there's also one other element that I think the American version does better that is what I like about it that is a little bit missing from the Japanese version. But when I mentioned campiness, so the American version definitely has its American horror. Oh, we have to throw a little bit more gross out at the audience than they really need to. And people point out that the iconic cursed tape in both versions kind of represents this. Where the American one has a much wider variety of imagery, but it has stuff in there that's you're supposed to go, eh. Whereas the Japanese one is supposed to be more subtle and unnerving when you watch it. And you know, I didn't feel it as strongly as I did with the American one, and that could just be a 20... Has it been 20 years? Probably closer to 18-year difference. And, you know, I'm going to take into account that that's that when I analyze it. But it's surprising how much there's still in common between the two. I'd say the main difference between them is really the investigation stage, the way it moves forward, but the setup is almost exactly the same, the ending is almost exactly the same. And, yeah, oh yeah, I mentioned what was kind of campy about the American version. The Japanese one is just too many psychics running around, and you know, it's kind of funny because the Japanese one may have too many psychic people, but the American one has too many cursed kids in it. Like, it only needed one, and that was the main character, but no, they had to make the son kind of this cursed character, too. The actor played his part very well, but I just thought that they maybe didn't need to do that. But they did that in order to control things in a slightly different way, and the innocence of the kid in the first one is kind of more interesting, I think. If there's anything... Okay, yeah. There's all these different things I can compare, but I think the main important difference in terms of something that was present in the American version, not in the Japanese version, and maybe this doesn't have to be present in the Ringu Dead by Daylight games then. In the English version, there's definitely more of a cursed presence felt around. And it's interesting because, like, between the two movies, when you have imagery from the cursed video being observed by the characters in real life, in the Japanese version, it's always they remembered something from the video. So, oh, there was the mirror from the video, and, you know, things like that. Whereas in the American version, sometimes they had moments like that, but they were less
subdued about that, but there was other imagery from the tape that just kind of felt like it was forcing itself on the characters as they went. The closest you get between the two of them is people afflicted by the curse. When photos are taken of them, their faces are distorted. And that's present in both the American and the Japanese versions of the story. And in the Japanese version of the story, it's just really unfortunate that it kind of ends there. Everything else that happens is our characters happening to stumble closer and closer to figuring out what they were seeing on the tape. And some of the stuff on the tape feels like it was a lot more tailored for them doing that. Whereas, at least in the American version, it felt like there wasn't as much information on the tape and they kind of had to put two and two together. But a lot of the imagery on the tape wasn't hints. It was... There were a lot of moments in there which I don't think were gross out parts, which manifested themselves here and there that reminded the people throughout their 7-day journey that this curse is still affecting them and maybe it's getting them stronger and stronger. And I think that's the element that I've really liked about The Ring. Not this feeling of impending doom, but this constant reminder that it was there the whole time, which is interesting because, a lot of Japanese horror, I think, tends to be a little more subtle than American horror. But this is one of those things where it's usually more common in Japanese horror for things to be very oppressive the entire time, when somehow they got that a little more right in the American version. But on the downside, I really didn't care for the horse scare scene. That was relevant to the story, but it didn't feel like as powerful as other moments of, oh, they're very cursed. This curse is following them, and there's these reminders all the time. It's interesting. And if you think about it, that's not something that necessarily needs to be present in the games. I mean, maybe it kind of can be. They have the ability to do that. It's really a curiosity. Even a lot of the characters inflict damage, but if they're doing the right thing with Sadako, then she won't claw with her hands, and she doesn't use any weapons. So then that raises a question of what is she going to do, weapon-wise. And, there are some killers and I think maybe some survivors that don't have cosmetics, and she may be one for which that makes sense just because, there's a lot of frosty-eyed killers, but she shouldn't have frosty eyes. Her hair should be covering her face the whole time. And if she attacks with her hands, she's not going to claw because I think in both versions she has no fingernails because she lost some in the fucking well. So does she attack with her hair? She does in one of the Ringu movies, it sounds like, or maybe it was Ringu vs. Grudge or something. And I've only watched the first Ringu movie, so I'm completely out of touch on it. She has psychic powers. Should she attack with psychic powers? And it's kind of weird because now this kind of feels like she should be something in between the nurse and the spirit, which are characters that already exist. Maybe with a little bit of Freddy, because, she has some teleporting ability, except maybe the nurse also has teleporting, so I don't know if that's the same thing. Basically, she's an iconic horror icon. She's not slasher per se. Usually her stories are more investigative, people looking into things sort of thing. Well, I say that as if Ring 2 and the Rings and Ringu 2 and Ringu 3, as if all of those necessarily follow those, when I don't think that's the case. I've only seen half of those movies. I named the American ones, of course, and we'll have to see. She just feels like she has the capability of being something that's definitely unique. And the problem with that is, Freddy was apparently very unique and they had to nerf him a lot to the point where now he's not so exciting. So I don't know what they'll do, but I'm interested. And I do feel like it's good that I've watched Ringu. Even if, my analysis is not... It's not fair between the two of them. So I'm trying to say what I can objectively measure as, things that are obviously interesting and different. No, I don't want to think about too many other things. truth of the matter is, I should probably wrap things up. I was kind of hoping that big thing was like a box of anime, but it's not. So I'm not quite sure what my priority for watching stuff is. But, oh well. Anyways, I'm pretty sure I get some anime for next week, so probably I do an apartment tour that's completely separate from anime DVD collection updates. So I guess we'll figure that out. Y'all, have a nice week.